Well, hello. Hopefully, I'm speaking with a warm, energetic tone. Haha, that's what podcasters are supposed to speak like, right? Hopefully, I'm conveying that vibe. Anyway, welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. And this time, we're going to look into the music that moves us, challenges us, and perhaps changes the game. I'm Wade, as you might have gathered, and today we're going back to 1999 to talk about a record that's as fierce as it is fun. Le Tigre, the debut album from the feminist electroclash trio of the same name. Now, I did another episode where I did a sort of general overview of the band Le Tigre, but this time we're going to look more into the debut album. And some of you, if you've heard the song Decepticon, you might have that riff kind of popping up in your brain right now. The album didn't just blend genres; it smashed them together. Le Tigre is a lo-fi, punk-infused, synth-laced shot of adrenaline, and behind that sound, there's a mission, a message, a whole lot of glitter and rage, you might say. And who is Le Tigre anyway? The band formed in the late 90s and was led by Kathleen Hanna, a controversial figure to some, but a Riot Girl legend for many, and former frontwoman of Bikini Kill. Alongside her were Johanna Fateman and Sadie Benning. I think I'm pronouncing those names correctly. And, Sadie Benning was later replaced by J.D. Sampson. And together they took the DIY punk spirit and ran it through a drum machine. And that was really sort of the sound of this album. This wasn't just music to shout along to, it was music you could dance to while questioning everything from gender roles to the politics of indie film. So it had sound and style. Le Tigre helped define the electroclash movement, a genre that combined punk's raw attitude with the sleek sheen of electronic beats. It's messy and melodic, gritty and catchy. They recorded the album in a home studio setup, from what I understand, and that lo fi energy is all over it. The result is that the songs feel intimate, confrontational, and sort of impossible to ignore. This is more of a marketable group than something like Atari Teenage Riot. And the band is still pretty popular, or the group, whatever you want to call it. The entity is still pretty popular. The album is full of political sharpness, but it never feels like homework. It's sure it's got the feminist themes throughout, but you know, it's it's something you can pay attention to or kind of zone out to. It's really all up to you. It's critical of media and cultural gatekeepers, even though I assume Kathleen Hanna would be seen as a bit of a gatekeeper herself. But it does all this with hooks and some humor. It's not a humorless album. This is protest music disguised as a dance party, I suppose you might say. And there are some standout tracks here. A few of the key songs. There's Decepticon, the song that is most known from this album, the most iconic track, perhaps, with 89 million views on YouTube, which is probably more views than some out there would think. It's a high energy call out of punk's double standards, where rebellion is marketed but substance is missing. It's bratty sounding, bold, and it's undeniably got a catchy aspect to it. You know, the vocals in Decepticon, they're they they're definitely something that might get stuck in your head. And there's also the who who took the bump part that Actually, I believe got a lawsuit against them. Another track is called Hot Topic. It's sort of a love letter to trailblazers. They name check various icons. It's like flipping through the zine section of a radical bookstore, only, set to a dance beat. Then there's another track that I'm not so crazy about. It's called What's Your Take on Cassavetes? It's a little bit of a weird track, but it does stand out. The point isn't whether or not I love it or hate it in this particular part of this review. I'm just saying that it's a track that could be remembered. And this one actually takes a jab at indie film legend John Cassavetes. Specifically, it seems to question the hero worship around male auteurs and the toxic masculinity often embedded in their work. And yeah, they it's a little bit of a weird topic. It's a bit of a stereotypical feminist kind of track, to be honest, because nothing says stereotypical feminism than just paying attention to an independent filmmaker and sort of like trash talking his legacy or whatever. And I'm not really that familiar with John Cassavetes. I know he was in Rosemary's Baby, and I haven't seen any of his movies. But I think that one of the things I would say about this track is that um, there's sort of a standard warning I would give to movie critics, and that is simply that just because it's depicted in a story doesn't necessarily mean that the writer or the filmmaker or the cast or whoever 100% agree with that character, their decisions, or what have you. They're telling a story. I think that sometimes is a forgotten element. So I don't know if that critique really would apply to this song. That they're sort of overlooking that it's a story that, or they were stories that his movies were putting on the screen, and characters can be complex, they can be evil, or they can have bad motives or whatever, questionable motives, flawed understandings of the world, what have you. So it's a little bit odd to have this song as like a film critique in just a couple minutes or whatever. And I really should watch some of his movies at some point to see like what all their fuss is about in this song, like how 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 relevant is, because I mean this band could have sang about a lot of different songs on this album. Why did they choose to zero in on this guy? You know what what's the big cause of that focus? I'm wondering. It's a little bit odd, but anyway, I've said enough about that. I'm going to move on. Another track that is actually better than the last one is My Metro Card. It's a sharp and catchy takedown of New York politics, especially then Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who of course went on to be much more disgraced. So it's a protest song really, and it was nice to see them critiquing Rudy Giuliani, and you know part of the messaging here is that Rudy Giuliani tried to clean up the streets by putting the strip clubs out of work or whatever, something like that. I think is the theme of this song, and there's bound to be some hypocrisy there, and it's just a song to check out, I suppose. So why did this album matter? Well, putting aside the fact that Decepticon actually, like I said, got almost 100 million views, which is actually kind of crazy. I didn't know that song was that popular until I just paid attention to the number of views. But Le Tigre, they weren't just a cool band with a cool album, but it was an attempt to shift the conversation and create food for thought. I think there's no way you're going to agree with everything that she says. You know, it's one of those things where if you're really paying attention to a person's political views, you're going to eventually find something you disagree with. But it brought different perspectives into uh, indie and electronic scenes where they were often sidelined. It made politics kind of fun, accessible, and danceable. And it was just a catchy album. It did all of this without ever compromising its message. And today it's sort of a landmark, not just in electro punk or riot girl history, but in the history of political pop music, period. And like I said, it's a pretty big album, I think. And I'm sure there are some bands out there that have been inspired by Le Tigre. So if you've never heard this album or haven't listened to it in a while, go cue it up. Feel free to play it loud. And remember, you can critique the system and still have a damn good time while doing it. So that's all for this episode of Critical Weight Theory. If you liked it, or even if you didn't, go ahead and subscribe. Feel free to review it, make fun of my voice, tell me where I'm wrong, and share this episode and other episodes with anyone who you think needs to have a little bit of feminist disco punk in their life. So until next time, keep listening loud, and yeah, put the bomp in the bomp shabomp, or whatever the hell that song says.